Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club, a nonprofit dedicated to bringing ideas and people together over community conversation. Today's program, part of the CMC's long-running Optimal Health series, we're so honored to have presenting sponsors for this series, specifically the Ohio State University Wex Medical Center, Nationwide Children's Hospital, and Ohio Health. The presenting sponsor for today's forum and today's live stream is the Center for Human Kindness by the Columbus Foundation. Thank you so much to all of those wonderful organizations who are supporting human connection. We're also grateful to the National Church Residencies and the Ellis for their support, and we'd like to thank the Columbus Dispatch as well for their live stream. Today's forum, From Solitude to Solidarity, Healing Ohio's Loneliness Epidemic, is an incredible conversation. Human beings are wired for social connections. For evidence of this, just look around you. Look at this room of individuals who are gathering. For those who are gathering online, look at the individuals that you have an opportunity to connect with when you're in an office space or in your home. But last year, the Surgeon General declared loneliness and isolation, quote, a public health emergency. Loneliness can increase the risk of premature death to levels comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That's huge. Today, we're honored to host a discussion on the loneliness epidemic here in Ohio and its profound health implications, including strategies to build socially connected communities. We're thrilled to welcome today's panelists, Dr. Amy Acton, private practice in preventative medicine, Dr. Whitney Ragland-Bignall, for Honor Sleeves Associate Clinical Director of Nationwide Children's Hospital, Susan DeMichael, the CEO of National Church Residencies, and Dr. Megan Schaubing, Medical Director of Psychiatric Emergency Services for Ohio Health. And a conversation would not be a conversation without a good moderator. Our host, Tracy McCambridge, Director of Art and Resilience for the Wex Center for the Arts. Tracy, welcome to the CMC, and let's take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm so thrilled to be here with you all today and to be here with our esteemed panelists. Social connection and feelings of belonging are truly drivers of health and well-being for all of us. Loneliness is a deceptively complex issue, and I'm sure at some point in your life you found yourself surrounded by people while still feeling alone for a whole host of reasons unique to you and your situation. For the purposes of today's conversation, and this is something that we discussed in advance, we would like to invite you to consider this nuanced social issue through an ecological lens. What does that mean? So when you consider this issue of loneliness, first we need to recognize that we are all interconnected at a whole variety of levels and through different channels. Loneliness is about relationships, not just having them, but the quality of them. And as individuals, we are continuously growing and evolving in our relationship to ourselves, but also the people around us. We impact and are impacted by our self-talk, our relationship with our family and friends, our relationship with our coworkers, our relationship with our workplace, the businesses and organizations in our community, all the way out to the macro level of public policy and laws that impact us. Impact goes from micro to macro and back again. And this panel and how and where we show up within this issue of loneliness in our community is a reflection of that ecology. I'm here because I get to create super cool programs at the Wexner Center for the Arts with the core intention of supporting our participants well-being while we dig into the arts and connect as a group and explore creativity in a variety of ways. The arts tap into our humanity and allow us to look critically at how we relate to others, ourselves, and the world around us. And this work wouldn't be possible, though, and these programs wouldn't be successful if they weren't collaborative across sectors. So I get to work with artists, I get to work with social workers, healthcare professionals, along with the very people that these programs are meant to support. So students at The Ohio State University, military veterans, people living with chronic illness, and beyond. And so we get to learn from each other in this work, which is really exciting. And I'm so excited to continue that learning today. And so to kick us off, I wonder, Dr. Acton, if you could maybe level set for us a little bit and help us to understand some of the research that has been coming out around loneliness and its impact on all of us.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's so wonderful to be back here at home and with this incredible panel. Another public health problem, right? You might not want to see me, but one of the things we know from the pandemic, there really has never been something that has so untethered us, unmoored us. It disrupted every supply chain. It affected every life, and nobody has gone through this unscathed. And that said, people think a lot about the polarization we're living in and the disruption, but my experience of the pandemic in the beginning and Ohioans was love was so much greater than the hate. I can't tell you enough, and I have the privilege of going around the country, going around the state, hearing story after story, and these are stories much more of connection and how we helped one another get through. And so to me, when the Surgeon General came out in 2003 with a Surgeon General's advisory on loneliness and isolation, that is what C. Everett Koop did back in my early days of my career, which was smoking. And we've done these for things like obesity and then addiction and the opiate epidemic. So to do it on something that felt like softer, and then when you dug in, it was beyond profound. This is over 20 years of data collection all across the world. So the trends we are seeing began much farther back. He says that loneliness is much more than, just a feeling. Loneliness is actually a natural response of our body, just like hunger and thirst. It's there for a reason. It's like putting your finger on the stove, you have a reflex, like pull off. So when you first feel loneliness, which all of us do, it causes you to often want to reach out and reconnect because we have been so hardwired to need one another to survive. So it's just that basic. So that early response draws you to people. But if it is chronic and longer lasting, that begins to become something that changes your physiology, your psychology, and even your behavior. Some people withdraw, others lash out when they're feeling that. And we think a lot about folks who fall through the cracks. We certainly think about aging population, which has a high incidence of being alone, but youth feel the most lonely. I mean, the data is very startling. And you say all of this to say heart disease, 15 packs of cigarettes, 15 cigarettes a day, 6 drinks a day, more than obesity can predict your mortality and that you die sooner. So it's a profound underlying root cause of all these diseases of despair that lay over top of it. It will sound simple now, but 20 years from now, I think we'll have a fundamentally different way of looking at our well-being. And the good news is, you don't do an advisory unless there's something you can do about it. And there are things we can do as individuals and things we can do collectively, and you're going to be hearing many, many examples that are already underway. There's an antidote, and that is connection and compassion and care for one another. And boy, we know we need that more than ever right now, so thanks.
Absolutely. How does loneliness show up in the people that I know you all work with? When you're talking with someone, and they might not say explicitly like, oh God, I'm really lonely, I feel really socially isolated. How do you know that, or kind of get the vibe that someone needs connection?
Well, I work with young kids up to, so 0 to 21 is where I see my patients and families. And oftentimes kids will say things to me like, I don't have any friends, or I don't trust the people I'm around. I stay to myself, that's where I'm good. And many times when they say those words to me, it's like a red flag that they're probably not connected as much as they need to be. And even though they say they don't need friends, oftentimes they want them, but they don't know how to have them, or they don't know who to trust to let into that sphere for them.
I think in the emergency department, throughout really all of Ohio and probably throughout the country, we see people in their worst moment, people that come in with mental health crises, and they come to the ED because there's nowhere else for them to go. And they're at that moment where they just feel stuck and they feel so hopeless, and it's so humbling connecting with somebody when they're in that worst moment. And it's probably what I love the most about my job. And what so many people say in that moment is, there's just no hope, there's no future, and so oftentimes it's because there is nobody that they feel cares about them. And you can't even imagine what an impact it can be if there's just one single person, one single reason to live, we call it within, suicide prevention. We want that one reason to live. And for some people, it may be a child, it may be a neighbor, it may even be a pastor or just someone that was kind to them. And so we really see every single day working with people and with mental health crises, the importance of having social support, of having somebody who cares, somebody who will make you feel that you matter.
What I would add, so I work with National Church Residences, and we have the honor and privilege of serving older adults in housing and in services. And I think your question was, when do you know if an older adult is at that place? And it's funny, I was thinking, often when we know, it's too late because it's already presented as a health issue. And what I love about this conversation is we're talking about the root cause. Often when we find out, we treat the symptoms. We go right to, life preservation, medication, bringing someone in for treatment, right? But what we're talking about today is even more powerful, and that's because we're talking about the root cause, and that's what I love, because my honest answer is often when I know, it's too late.
And it's kind of a tricky thing. I know I tend to self-isolate, if I'm struggling at all, and a lot of us do. And research has actually shown that chronically lonely people can sometimes avoid social connection and social interactions. So can we unpack this a little bit? It's tricky. I mean, I know you were saying like I don't need friends. I don't like. There are a lot of self-talk things that happen that talk us out of connecting with people because it feels scary. So can we kind of dig into that a little bit?
Because I think it's so, not funny, but it's ironic, right? Because you want to be around people. But the more you aren't around them, you start to have these thoughts that maybe they don't want you around. Or maybe you're going through too many things and you can't talk to them, or it's going to be too much. Or you just build these stories and these thoughts. And so the more you think those things, the less likely you are to engage, right? And so it becomes this vicious cycle of isolation that your thoughts are now pushing you to be further and further away and not helping you get toward the people we know that can so help you, build the connection you want and need.
What role do you see technology having in all of this? You know, with COVID, we now have telehealth options. We're Zooming a lot, you know, Teams meetings a lot, and we're not in physical space with one another quite as much as we used to be in certain ways. So what impact are you seeing technology having?
So I think it's a double-edged sword, really, because you know, the positive aspect of technology we saw during COVID, where at least we were able to stay in touch with one another. We had previously launched a pretty big telemedicine program across Ohio in our emergency departments and other spaces at Ohio Health so that we could connect to our patients no matter where they were. And I think during COVID, people were able to stay connected in that manner. But on the flip side of it, what we see in the emergency department a lot, people coming in crisis largely due to technology. So for instance, teenagers, we have so many teens who come in with suicidal thoughts, and they're really at that feeling stuck moment because of bullying that's happening over the internet, or because they don't feel connected to others, and they see what other people are doing on Facebook, and it makes them feel bad about themselves. And so I think really it can work either way, and that's something that we have to be aware of, especially with our youth.
Yeah, I'm sure we've all seen the graphs where when you look at some of the mental health issues that, you know, to Dr. Acton's point, a lot of this started well before COVID. 2007, you know, what happened in 2007, right? The iPhone. And when you look particularly at younger adults and teens, you know, that's when a lot of, I think, you know, we can pinpoint and say, well, this is when it started. And so I think it's easy as a society for us to say technology is the problem and stop there. But it has to be part of the solution. We can't just go back to the way the world is just never going to be again. And so when I look at older adults, we now have over 75% of older adults over 65 are using the internet. And wouldn't it be a beautiful thing if we could connect them with all these young people who are on their phones, right?
I was just going to add that I agree it's such a double-edged sword, because in many ways it is helping us build social connection, helping us foster relationships with people we already know. You know, I love uploading photos of my son and seeing people who don't live in this state, and I get to share raising him with them, right? And so we get to build that connection because we know each other and we have some commonality. But there are all these risks because you have that fear of missing out, that FOMO of you see all these people and they only show you one side of life, and you think your life is not going as well because your life doesn't look as beautiful or as pretty as theirs, or you might be experiencing that cyberbullying that was mentioned. But I also think that it oftentimes, the iPhone and technology grabs so much of our attention that we miss out on other ways to connect. And so what ends up happening is you could be around your dining room table, but you're all on your phone. And so what ends up happening is you're missing out on deeper connection with people right in front of you because you're on your phone, right? And that is the part I think that's making the isolation and the loneliness harder, because yes, I think teens are struggling sometimes to get off their phones because they create these devices so that we use them. But the adults in their lives are also on those phones, and teens are saying, I wish my parent wasn't on that device so much, right? So I think we gotta think about, like, yes, we have these devices. How do we use them balanced in a way that they do improve our connection, but they don't take away from that in-person time that we really need and desire?
Open and reflective about the practice of using your phone, and talk about the fact that, like, hey, we need to put this down together, and here's why. So we took some time to break down what loneliness means a bit, and just as important, we need to really question and understand what belonging means. Like, what does that really look like? What does it mean? And so I wonder if we can, just like we talked about loneliness a bit, what are some characteristics of belonging so that we can be really intentional about cultivating that sense?
I mean, I think when I think of belonging, and again, my perspective is largely around trying to optimize people's mental health, sort of practicing preventative mental health, we call it, something that we all really need to be working on and helping our kids and friends and families to work on. I think about everyone needs to feel as if they are needed. And that's what we see with many of these people who are isolated. They want to feel like they're a part of something. A child may not be a star athlete, but that child needs to feel like there's a place where they belong. And I think one of the things we were talking about in preparing for this panel was how people can be together in a room full of people and they still feel alone. A child can be at school with a bunch of peers and a bunch of kids that in theory share similar interests, and that child can feel really alone. So it's going beyond physical togetherness and helping each and every person in our community feel like there's a place for them, where they're welcome and it's inclusive and where they feel needed.
Something Megan said that I loved was having that purpose. Like, that's when you know you're really tapping into belonging. It's being seen, it's being heard, it's being known, but then it's like having that greater purpose. And I love Gen Z almost as much as I love older adults, because I live with several of them, which, as you know, is a challenge for those of you who are close to Gen Z. But the one thing about Gen Z, you know, a lot of people are down on Gen Z. They're always on their phones. They're kind of lost. They've got all these weird habits, and, you know, it's hard to connect, right? One thing I love about Gen Z, they're like the most volunteering generation we've ever seen on this planet. Like, 2/3 of Gen Zers are volunteering. And it's like, they're looking for that purpose. Like, this is amazing. Like, this is a group of people who want to give back. And so that just gives me a lot of hope.
I was going to add, we at On Our Sleeves created this wonderful content on belonging this year, and what I loved about the work that one of my colleagues, Will Lever, did a literature review about belonging, and he talked a lot about how it's innate. We all need to feel like we belong, and there's these components to belonging. We have to have skills to belong. You have to know how to talk to people, make friends. You have to have the opportunity, right? You got to have, you know, people around, or the more isolated people are, or places where there are limited resources, unfortunately, those can often then leave you with less opportunity. You have to have that motivation to want to. And then the key, I think, too, is that perception, right? Like, your personal feeling about how you belong in that room, because everyone in the room can actually think you belong. They look at you and they think, you're so smart and you do all these great things and we love that you're here. But if you don't have that inward perception of that belonging, it doesn't work. And so sometimes I think it's important to talk to yourself a little bit and look at your thoughts a little bit to see, like, you know, I might be talking myself out of not belonging. Right? And that's with the work with the kids that I do all the time. It's that talk and what are they saying to themselves, and helping them see opportunities where maybe they thought this person doesn't like you, but they really revere you and adore you. And so helping them to see that, I think, is also important with belonging.
And then I would add, you know, we're thinking about this individually, and certainly it's hidden in plain sight. You know, 1 in 2 people are experiencing it right now, but it's invisible. But it's in our community level too, as you were saying. So what are we a community that makes people feel like they belong? And intentionally creating that is a vital part of this. In workplaces, when you are feeling lonely or isolated, your productivity goes down. In schools, you don't do as well. Creating places where we matter. This is one of the things I loved at the Columbus Foundation. You know, we talk a lot about kindness, and I remember trying to say, you know, kindness is not weakness. It is not a fluffy concept. It's something that you have to intentionally build. It's age-old, enduring principle in every religion, in every society, scientifically proven. When you do it inwardly, one of the hardest to do, as everyone is saying, that can change you. When you do it outwardly in service to one another, that changes your neurochemistry. We had a researcher, she's still there, Heather Tsavaris, who did research on belonging after working for the State Department, dealing with people who became suicide bombers and what was going on and how was that taken advantage of. And so this mattering and belonging is essential to our contract. This reciprocity, the reciprocal nature of our life together. But what we're suffering from right now, worldwide and certainly in this country, where we're seeing one another as not a part of the same team, as not having the same value set that we all cherish, even though when you get with anyone individually, you find it again. So this is a collective challenge to us as well as at our individual level.
And what kind of response, especially since the Surgeon General, came out with this announcement or this warning, what kind of community level response have we seen? We have been talking a lot about the individual things that we can do, our interpersonal, connections, but have we seen an active response at more of a community level?
Yeah. I think we need to do more. The good news is we're talking about it. I am seeing us talk about it as an organization. We're trying to lean in and think about, how can we make sure every older adult that we serve doesn't just get a roof or a service, or it's not transactional. How do we go from making what we do transactional to relational? That's the question. And I think we're talking about it. We're putting things in place. One of the things I'm most proud of is, our chaplaincy program has grown, and regardless of your background or your faith tradition, our chaplains are available in Central Ohio to talk with any older adult. We just started a program in New Jersey and New York, just hot off the press, that I'm so excited about too, where older adults can call a chaplain and just talk about anything. I've even started to call some of the older adults in our communities and just thank them, especially those who are giving back. And by the way, you don't want to schedule those unless you have time. You can't fit that into a 20-minute meeting. But we're taking steps, but are we doing enough? No. It's so much more needs to be done. Yeah.
I agree. I think we're trying to do little things, big things. I think a lot of organizations have really put a big focus on wellness. And I know that's something we've done a really good job. I'm really proud of what we've done in that space at Ohio Health. And for me, it's easy, right? Because every day I deal with people with mental health crises, and part of what we have to do for them is, as a part of safety and disposition planning, is optimizing that connectedness and social support. We view that as such a known protective factor for suicide. But even in your day-to-day work, whatever you do for your job, whatever you do every day, there are these little ways that you can check in with people and that you can connect with people. And that's a lot of what our wellness department does. We have a head of physician wellness and a head of associate wellness. That's their full-time job, to just look out for everybody's wellness. And so we even talk to our managers about, how do you check in with your team? It sounds kind of obvious, right? But what's the scripting? How do you have that conversation? Because not everybody's comfortable doing that. And I think by sort of approaching it from all these different angles, we just start to chip away little by little. And then we look to our community partners. We have such a good team of mental health partners here in Central Ohio. And we share ideas. Whenever we do something that works, we share it with Ohio State, and we share it with Mount Carmel and the Atom Board. And we all kind of work together. But I think it has to be little and big things. And a lot of these things are happening, but you're right. More needs to be happening for sure.
Yeah, and we were just talking over lunch. We're already starting to share some ideas, because I think we're doing things individually, but I don't think yet we're at the point of where we're doing it together. Yeah.
I've been really excited about the increase in population health. Just in the 5+ years I've been in Columbus, I've seen so many initiatives. And I think what makes population health work the best is when we're not working in our silos, we're working together. And so, I work at the Linden Primary Care Office, so I know a lot about what I see many organizations like Nationwide Children's coming together to build with the community on the assets that the community has. Because people live in communities, and we know that that is a way in which they can connect. So when I'm there doing the parenting program that I do in the rec center and we're building connection, that's not just, me doing that, but that's other organizations all working together. And, when people are mentoring, that's other organizations. So I think we are doing things. There's still work to do, but I'm hoping we're building roadmaps that are laying a foundation so we can kind of continue that on that work and making connection and belonging a part of the population initiatives that are happening in the state.
It's important also to look to other regions and areas to see, what they're doing. And I wonder, I know we talked a little bit about some of the initiatives that are happening in the UK right now and positions that have been appointed by the government. I wonder if you could share a little bit about that. We had a little chat over email about those.
So my first question is always, whose job is it to create the conditions in which we can all flourish and live up to our potential? And when we do that, we know that feeling of all ships rising. And right now, if you think about Columbus, is there someone whose job it is to help us be the most connected, caring, compassionate city where people feel like they belong? So that's a question I always begin with, and everywhere I could name so many things that are going on here, and regionally. For instance, doing parks and libraries are a huge part of the Surgeon General's strategy for us to have healthier, well lives. But having access for everyone is so important. Intergenerational programs that have, we have examples here in town of children and elderly being in the same building and helping one another. In the UK, they actually created a position nationally, and then those positions exist locally. What the job is helping neighborhood groups come together, it's helping schools do different things and teach the skills about how to connect with one another. It's happening in service programs, but there really is, this is so profound an effect on our well-being. If it is the underlying cause of despair and our disconnect, if our civil society, we rely in this democracy on this belief that we're in this together. We have a lot of these false arguments about, our freedoms, which we are all cherished as a part of the system, our community and connected things. But the truth is, we're interconnected. We are absolutely, if a pandemic could not show the fact that there's a shortage of amoxicillin in the ER because of a supply chain, everything this pandemic taught us, common enemy, same enemy, aliens invading from outer space, one enemy we all shared. But what does it call us to do with one another when those things get tough? And so our fabric moving forward, and I don't say this to be depressing, I say that this is exactly the moment where we get a chance to co-create the world we want to live in. We're still reverberating from all this, but there is a reckoning we must do because we won't move on if we don't. And the Surgeon General's report, which is wonderful to read, it has a whole strategic plan, industry by industry suggestions, and that work is growing. There are other countries that are a little bit farther along in this work. There are data measures. There are tech standards. There's a real want to help entrepreneurs create and incentivize entrepreneurship around technology that connects us, because it can do good as well as bad. There are policies that can be done that are different, that actually incentivize relationships. And then I hope we can circle back to what you can do, but I'll leave it to others.
I would just say the Surgeon General's advisory opinion is is a really great read. If you haven't read it, it's easy to download. It covers so many things and more. It gives so many great points and ideas. I think, sitting up here and talking about it, the thing that just flashed into my mind was, I was a child of the 70s, and I remember when the Surgeon General gave the advisory on smoking. I don't know how many of you remember that, but I happen to have had a father who was a chain smoker. And, as a child, I created these little signs, little warnings, and I would leave them by his pack of cigarettes, okay? And lo and behold, he did, stop smoking later in life. He's since passed on. But we still laugh about that today. And I think, are we taking this advisory that seriously? I mean, have we really launched a campaign as families, as a community? You mentioned the Minister of Loneliness in the UK, have we done that? I don't know that we have. I know I haven't. I haven't created signs in my teenagers' rooms, saying, watch for signs of loneliness. Are you on your phone too long? But in all seriousness, I mean, I do think that we are at a moment here. And that advisory opinion, that was a big deal. Like, it really was. And so what's next? That's what we're here talking about.
It did take a long time to get there, and the Surgeon General has a book out, Dr. Vivek Murthy. He has a book called Together, The Healing Power of Connection in an Otherwise Lonely World. There is an On Being, for those of you who I'm a huge Krista Tippett fan. I think this is one of the most powerful interviews, On Being, a podcast with him where they really can talk what motivated this work and what he has seen traveling this country and hearing everyone's stories. So those are some tools to go learn more.
So it's the CMC's long-standing tradition to take audience questions. So we'll move to questions from our live stream and in-person audience in just a few moments. And if you have questions, please make your way over to the microphone in the back now. And if you're watching online, please type your questions into the chat. But before we take audience questions, I have one more question for you all. So we talked about sort of a call for action, right? We talked about, at the community level, things are slowly starting to happen. But, what is your call to action for our audience today? What would you like everyone to, walk away ready to do or ready to think about, ready to connect over?
Never, ever underestimate the importance, the impact of a kind word, of just reaching out to somebody at some point in your day. I would just challenge you. You never know what people are struggling with, and you have no idea how many people have told me when I said, you've had these bad thoughts about wanting to die most of your life. What's kept you alive, or what kept you from doing this act yesterday? They'll say, well, I talked to this officer, one of your protective services officers, who just kind of made me feel heard and made me feel like somebody cared and helped me to kind of see things in a different perspective. So a kind word, a human connection, a conversation, it doesn't have to be anything major. It can just, check in with somebody, see how their day was, ask them a question about something, especially if you see a warning sign that somebody might be struggling. Just know that you can make a huge difference.
I would say just think about the older adults in your life. And when you think about them as part of the solution. When we talk about the loneliness epidemic, don't think about them as part of the problem, the people who are away and not part of society. Because as I just get to know and love and care for more older adults, I just see how they are such part of the solution. They're wise. They want to give back. I think there's something between, I love that we're bookends here. You know, she's at Children's Hospital, I'm at National Church Residences. There's something here about the power of these different generations at this moment in history that we need to tap into.
So I was thinking, I had so many that I could leave with. But I think we have to build on our culture of connection. And when we're talking about young people, they rely on us as adults to be trusted people who can model how to do this. And so reaching out to them, demonstrating how to do it, giving them the opportunities to engage, build skills, process, they need us. And, you know, the stats are there because I think so many times we think, you know, 1 and 2, and we think, oh, not me. But there's probably lots of people in this room who are also having challenges. And I want you to know that we have to also break that cycle that we have. And we have to reach out. I have to tell myself that sometimes too. Like, I have to reach out when I'm having a hard time. And we have to encourage our kids to do the same and model those things, because that's going to help us to, the more isolated we are, we can't connect, right? And so we have to figure out ways to break that cycle.
Thank you. I had a breakfast this morning with Franklin County Children's Services, where they were graduating kids out of the system, sharing the story of my childhood, having a sort of rough time growing up. And I often think about the people. There are people who would look the other way when they see something that's uncomfortable, it's hard. They didn't want their kids to play. And then I think about people who didn't, people who saw and did something. So at that very basic level, I just was reminded of it again today. You know, that's the stuff that saves lives and gives you hope and lets you know you matter when you might otherwise fall through the cracks. Individually, the Surgeon General talks a lot about if you could take 15 minutes each day, not just with your family, but somebody somewhere in your network from your life, to just reach out to them, and whether it's virtually, whether it's better yet talking, and reach out to someone. Make that sort of something you consciously do for your centeredness and well-being. And then when you're interacting, really looking, really trying not to be distracted. Like for that 15 minutes, just very much be there. And that's so incredibly powerful. Just a little bit of these things will go a long way when you start to notice something changing, even in yourself and your sense of the world we're living in right now. Larger than that, obviously, service of any kind, getting involved and participating in reweaving our fabric, whether it's in your workplace, in your school, if you are involved in civic life or in nonprofit life. We can't wait. I learned this during the pandemic. There is no Calvary coming other than us. And it begins with us realizing that we have to co-create this world that we want to be a part of. And then at the larger level, obviously, this will sound kind of, before I do larger, counterintuitive. One last thing from the Surgeon General is solitude, which is different than loneliness. But we actually all, for our well-being, need space to be intentional and reflect on things. And maybe for you, it's listening to music. Maybe for somebody else, it's meditation. It's a spiritual thing. But you need space to remember what our values are. What values are you living? Because we think about success as boxes we check off and ladders we climb, or money and power. And having, as a physician, and I'm sure you share this, been bedside as people are still learning and still changing in those last moments of life. And we all know that the answer was relationships. That is the thing that mattered most to them. And these values we hold dear, whether it be the way we can trust one another, care for one another, be compassionate, we want to live in a world, the one we teach in like the Mr. Rogers and the Sesame Streets to our kids, and then somehow we have to grow up and not be that. It is, in a strange way, amazingly simple. If it was in pill form, we'd be popping it. But it rests with us. And the well-being, I always think of as the well of our being. So you actually need some time for that before you go out there and do this.
Thank you. All right, so now Doug Buchanan with the CMC is curating questions from our live stream audience.
Tracy, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Oh, go ahead.
For those of you with us here in person, again, join Doug over at the microphone if you have questions.
Thank you, and thank you to today's panelists. This is a great conversation. We're getting a lot of questions online, even more than we typically do. Please do come join us here at the microphone if you have a question. Keep in mind, great questions at CMC have two things in common. They take less than 30 seconds to ask, and they do end with a question mark. Here's one from Carol Looper that checks both those boxes. Carol Looper asks, widowhood is a cause of loneliness. Are there specific coping mechanisms?
I will take that one. I would say being part of a community. If we look at, the number one factor in longevity study out of Harvard that's now running 80 years, it's, to Dr. Acton's point, it's relationships. That's the number one factor. And so losing that relationship is profound, it's hard. What we've seen time and time again, the more you can surround yourself with community. Communities is really the thing that will help.
I would just add, Carol, we still miss Fred. So just want to say, he's still with us.
Thank you for this great panel. My name is Eric Davies. My question, I'll start off with a question and then end with a question. Make CMC very happy here. But is emotional connection, like deeper emotional connection and vulnerability, a part of ending loneliness and getting past loneliness? And I ask this too because as a male and men, we are socialized not to connect emotionally and deeply and to not be vulnerable. And it's a cultural and social issue that leads to a lot of loneliness, I believe, and a lot of anger and a lot of rage, actually, among men in our society. And so is true, deep emotional connection necessary? And if so, how do we begin to shift this paradigm for everyone, but particularly men who I think really struggle with this? So I asked this panel of women. Thank you.
The Surgeon General really talks about, we have these two drives, and we went, in working on kindness at the Columbus Foundation, again, people want to see this thing as fluffy, but we talked a lot about love and hate. During the pandemic, there was the mom who did the act on love, not hate signs that went around. And so we talk about this during the pandemic, act on love, not hate, kindness, not fear. Now, love and fear are two drives that we have in us to this connect, but also fear, we're wired to survive, so fear plays a role. And fear often manifests in things like despair, but also anxiety, that sort of reaction, and also rage. And I think in feeling separate, sometimes those are actually more compelling emotions to give into, that they feel stronger. Kurt Vonnegut in his books would talk about, hate is just so, it gets more airtime, it's just so compelling, to give into that. And certainly we have a lot of folks suffering. If 1 in 2 people right now have measurable levels, like past that initial level I was talking about, it's pretty profound. And then if we have a world around us, quite honestly, again, bad actors taking advantage of that, or if it's more, it sells more media, but quite literally, people who gain by creating separation. It makes for a very vulnerable population. And that said, all of us, with very, very few exceptions of people suffering from we would talk about, it's very, very rare that someone doesn't have that capacity innately in them and a longing for that.
Interesting that you bring up men in particular. We know for a fact that men are less likely to reach out and get help if they're struggling with mental health problems like depression and anxiety. And so I think you're really onto something. How do we start to chip away at that? Well, I think if we look bigger picture, we've really started to chip away at the mental health stigma. Think about how much we're talking about mental health now. I mean, this younger generation, they love talking about going to a therapist, and they are all about it. They are all about, like, I'm missing my whole tour because I have to work on my mental health. I mean, it's really remarkable. I think we have to start to do the same thing specifically around men's mental health. And, I think on the smaller scale, the everyday scale, that's reaching out to male friends that you have and getting groups together, whether it's, doing activities or, I don't know, poker or playing a sport or, going for a run, whatever it may be. But also having conversations with our young men about, how do you feel? It's okay if you're not feeling great. It's good to reach out and get help. And if you, older men and middle-aged men, set a good example, then that shows the younger men it's okay to have these issues, and it's the right thing to do to reach out and get help.
Okay, it's okay for this to be fun. It doesn't, this, one project in Indianapolis goes around and doesn't ask older folks what they need. They say, what are you joyful about? Like they actually lead with, what are you excited about, as a way to connect. So don't think it's about, our suffering. It's being with. A lot of times you can't fix things in life. I mean, right? You can't cure, but you can be a part of healing by being with and holding space. And so whatever that space is, if it is the eclipse that held space for all of us, and we felt that feeling again, whether it's a sports thing, whatever it is, lean into that being with. And it's okay, I just want to add, this is for introverts and extroverts, rich and poor. This knows no boundaries. Being an introvert is a thing. Again, solitude is something that is healthy. It is, the feeling of loneliness is a painful, despairing feeling, and there's a difference.
Hi, I'm Casey Goldstein. I own All Paws Retreat, which is a dog daycare and boarding facility in town. So naturally, I deal with a lot of people that love animals, and animals is a very easy way for us to connect. So can you speak to any research on the benefits of dogs or having animals within people's lives and how that helps with belongingness?
I was just taking part in a book with the dean of our vet school. And his dream is that Columbus could be this pet-centric city. So you imagine, pets are so healing. There's tons of science on the profound impact on health, especially elderly having a pet. We know about care animals. One of the things that most moved me in Columbus was a documentary on our homeless population. A lot of people won't go into shelter because they won't leave the animal behind. So how do, again, we create a world that allows for this? You think of Jeff Edwards' new Rapid 5 and the new walkway that Jeff is doing, and we could be eating outside, and we're running into each other more because we've created a more communal thing, and maybe it should be pet-friendly as well. And so these are all parts of connection for a lot of people, especially people who have had trauma, animals, for kids. They can talk, right? The animal just looks and isn't, always there for you. It's a huge part of our healing. There's a concept called One Health. The world is, our human health and well-being, animal well-being, and the environment are one system. It's a G7 concept now. So to think that these things aren't all intertwined, and that we are only as well as those around us, including our pets.
I just wanted to say thanks for the question, because we haven't talked about that, and I am not personally aware of research on pets and loneliness, but I have seen research on pets and mental health, and some of the research that I've seen over the years has shown that it can better your mental health by, I think I've seen up to 50% in some studies. So it really is profound, and I think it's a great call out. It's an important part of the loneliness solution.
Thank you. We have about 2 minutes left. We'll try to get to at least a couple more questions. Jessica Spain, watching online, says, do we think that working from home has led to more disconnection in the workplace? If so, are there ways we can overcome that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know at least in the hospital, it was interesting because during COVID, I think this goes for all hospital systems, there were certain people that had to stay at the hospital and then certain people that didn't. And so it kind of broke things up a little bit. And now that, post-COVID, people are kind of getting back into the hospital or have gotten back into the hospital. One of the things I've found, since some people have shifted to hybrid or they've shifted to working from home, is trying to make sort of an effort, a very deliberate effort to get everybody together in person, whether it be weekly. I just had somebody in the emergency department the other day who was looking forward to this meeting with her coworkers that only happened on a Wednesday. I think it was a happy hour type thing, but make it whatever you want to make it. But I think it is really important to have that in-person connection. And I definitely have seen people who have become socially isolated because they work from home. And if they aren't making that active effort to connect in person with their colleagues and with other people, it can be very isolating.
So everyone, I wish we had more time, but I'm getting the wrap-up signal. So we're going to turn it over to Sophia for concluding remarks. Thank you.
Wow. It's so hard when we have to end our conversations that part of me feels so sad because I feel like we're just getting ramped up. What an incredible topic today. And I just want to call out for those who are experiencing extreme bouts of loneliness or a mental health crisis, you can certainly call or text 988, the National Suicide Crisis Lifeline. Dr. Amy Acton, you mentioned that this is a chance for us to create the world where we all want to live in. And it begins with us. And I think that for those who are members of the CMC who have joined our conversations either in person or online, that it's easy to hear this information and think, oh, well, this is something that Gen Z is dealing with. This is something that impacts the silent generation, and perhaps not you personally. But as Dr. Whitney Ragnall Bignall, I want to make sure I'm pronouncing that last name correctly, it requires us, you and I, in this room, those who are connecting with us online, to build up the skills, the motivation, and perception to create the world that we want to live in. I wake up every single day with so much joy, because every day the CMC gets to bring people together to center around our mission, which is connecting community, connecting people and ideas every single week. And it is up to us to weave together the world where we all belong. So with that, I want to thank The Ohio State University, Nationwide Children's Hospital, and Ohio Health. I want to thank the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation and National Church Residencies for supporting today's conversation. Can we give them one more round of applause? We're so grateful to be in this space, the Ellis, and from our partners with the Columbus Dispatch for presenting our live stream, as well as the Columbus Foundation for presenting our live stream. I'd also want to give one big round of applause to our panelists, Dr. Amy Acton, Dr. Whitney Ragnall Bignall, Susan DeMichael, Dr. Megan Schaubing, and to our host, Tracy McCambridge. Thank you all for a wonderful conversation. Let's give them another round of applause. All right, for those who are tuning in online and you're looking for that weekly connection to connect with other people, I hope that you can join us next week for Pathways to Prosperity, Breaking the Poverty Cycle in Central Ohio. And for those in the room, I invite you to join us as well. Thank you again for supporting our mission and investing in community conversations. Have a great day.